Welcome this evening. I'm going to start our slides here. Right. Welcome, everyone. I'm thrilled to have you joining us tonight. And just as that reminder that this session is being recorded, the Reading League would like to share with you that our mission is to advance the awareness, understanding, and the use of scientific aligned reading instruction throughout all of our states. The Reading League, this is an old slide, so I'm really happy to announce that this slide says 33 chapters, and we have to update that. We now have 40 chapters of 40 Reading League chapters across our country. So that means if you are not from Michigan, please check out your state's Reading League chapter and please join it. Lots of free events that are available online, like this wonderful opportunity that we have this evening with Dr. Tolson and Kovelman. The objectives for our state chapters are to provide professional development to teachers in the content of the science of reading, to support educators and administrators in that translation of the science of reading. What does that look like in application, and help support schools in that implementation? And also bring mission partners together to move the mission of the Reading League and the science of reading forward in our state. So partners like Decoding Dyslexia, IDA, look for those organizations in addition to the Reading League. Much of what you need to support yourself in the classroom can be found across those organizations. And then encourage university participation and movement towards the science of reading courses. And I've just had a lovely chat with Dr. Coulson, and she is just doing some incredible work in this direction, preparing in-service teachers in the state of Ohio to be prepared, much more prepared to do this work in the classroom. And then, of course, to support parents in learning and advocating for evidence-informed practice aligned with the science of reading. I'm going to stop sharing. And I do want to say that March 1st, we're going to have a coffee chat featuring Dr. Jane Ashby. So that is in the early morning. I believe we're doing 10 a.m. I don't have that, but please do look at our events to take a look at that. That's a nice one to not miss. We're going to have that some one-on-one time with Dr. Ashby around phonemic awareness. I will start with introducing Dr. Rebecca Tolson. She's the director of the Center for Structured Literacy at the University of Akron and a national consultant in literacy and dyslexia. With over 30 years of experience in education, she's a certified dyslexia therapist and qualified instructor. Dr. Tolson has played a pivotal role in shaping Ohio's dyslexia policies, co-authoring 3 state laws, and serving as the chair of the Ohio Dyslexia Committee. Oof, great work, Dr. Tolson. We're so excited to have you. In addition to our amazing Dr. Ulia Kovelman, what a gift she is to our state here in Michigan. She is a professor of psychology at the University of Michigan, specializing in literacy development and bilingualism. As a developmental cognitive neuroscientist, she uses brain imaging to study how children learn to read in different languages and writing systems. Her research explores the universal and language-specific factors influencing literacy and dyslexia in diverse learners. Yes, I said that correctly. So with that, I just want to turn the platform over to you so we have every minute of time with and some opportunities for some rich discussion. So with that, it is your platform.
Hello, everybody. It is wonderful to meet you. I am going to start my screen sharing so you can see the presentation. I'm also going to put the presentation in chat. So if you would like to be able, you should be able, actually, I don't know, the permissions might be just to view it. 1 second. So I don't want to take up any more time. So let me just start the sharing of the screen 1 sec. This is it. Share and slideshow. Can you see my slides?
Perfect.
Yes. And is it like looking normal? I remember last time there was
Yes.
some viewing issues. Okay, now it looks better. Excellent. Hello, everybody. So Rebecca, introduce yourself.
Okay, well, thank you for that introduction. Yeah, so yes, they mentioned that I'm the director of the Center for Structured Literacy at the University of Akron. So higher education is my current passion right now, training pre-service teachers in the science of reading, structured literacy, certification for dyslexia. Um, I've spent a good portion of my career. I did teach fifth grade for 5 years, so regular ed, but most of it was with special education and dyslexia. I'm a wife, a mom, and a grandma. My grandson is 13 months, and I have another grandson due in a week. So I'm going to have two little boys, and so excited about that. My hobbies, I love reading. I've taken up golf, and I love working out at the gym and fitness. So that's a little bit about me. Yulia?
Yes, hi everybody. I'm a professor at the University of Michigan right here in the state of Michigan in Ann Arbor. Come visit. I'm in the Department of Psychology as well as the combined program in education and psychology. We have a brain science lab. So yes, if you want to see a brain science lab, please come over. You're hearing some accent. I come from the former Soviet Union. And so I've been traveling immigrant waves for a very long time, and I'm interested in what happens in the immigrant communities as folks are navigating languages, including kids with dyslexia, which brings us to today's discussion. So, we will talk about words today, right? There's lots of things to talk about reading, right? Reading is a big thing. But today we'll just talk about words. Rebecca will invite us again if you want to hear about things other than words. So today is just the words. And the words get bigger when you start with the words. They're kind of small, they're big and small and sad, right? And a cat and a dog and a fish and a hat. But then as you go through schooling, those words get more complicated, they get longer, they get less familiar, they become borrowed out of Latin and Greek. So, what's about the words? So today we will talk about all there is. We're going to talk about small words and big words. We're going to talk about what we call polymorphic words, stuff made out of morphemes. And we'll talk about hearing complex words, reading complex words, and teaching complex words. And that's Rebecca's job. She'll tell you how to teach people because I have never been a teacher and I have a ton of respect for those who have that experience, which is why Rebecca and I do this together because you can ask me about the brain, but you can't ask me about teaching. And Rebecca is here to answer real life questions. So morphemes. Morphemes are cool stuff. If you think about morphemes, morphology, lexical morphology, syntactic morphology, you might think it's out of those dusty linguistics textbooks. Well, they're not. It's the living, breathing element of language. That's how we make new words, lunchables, conflictless payment, conflictless delivery. Flexitarianism, who knows about that one, right? This like our grandmas don't know these words, right? Our parents are catching up. Our kids have a whole lot of vocabulary and they make fun of us. That's how this stuff comes about. This is not out of dusty textbooks. This is living, breathing. This is the beat of the language. That's how we make words. That's how we understand each other. So development of morphology develops really early. So if you were 2 or 3, I could play this game with you. Here's a bug. Now there's another one. There are 2 of them. There are 2 wugs. Amazing, right? Toddlers just go, yay, 2 wugs. They can do it. Here's an example from a student of mine. Her 5-year-old brother didn't know the word for mustache. And so he said, nose bangs. Obvious. It's obvious these are nose bangs. That's what you do, right? That's morphology, folks. Like I said, not out of the tested textbooks. It's the living, breathing, and the youngest of our species produce them in all sorts of fun ways. That's how we make words. If you go to school, as many of you do, and you want to see if your kid has a handle on this, you can go, okay, I'm going to give you 3 words. You're going to tell me which one doesn't belong. Classroom, bedroom, mushroom. Which word doesn't belong? And hopefully your 5, 6, 7-year-olds, they'll tell you, well, mushroom doesn't belong. That's right. There's no room in a mushroom. How clever, right? So that's morphological awareness for you folks. Morphological awareness, just like phonological awareness, right? Morphological awareness is our active sensitivity to the units of meaning and being able to manipulate them. What else can you do if you wanted to figure out if your third graders are getting there, with their morphological awareness? Well, you can say, I'm going to give you a word, and you're going to use that word to help me complete a sentence. And they don't have to see any of this. This is all auditory. Sidewalk. The baby is learning how to walk. Foggy. On some mornings, you can see fog. Election. How many women did they elect? Here's some cool stuff about this. Sidewalk is a compound. These are root compounds. There's two roots here. There's a side and a walk, and I can take them apart, and each of these words will live by themselves. We can put things on the side, and we can then go for a walk. The word foggy is a derivation of morphology typical of English. You take the word fog, you add a Y, now you got foggy. Y doesn't live by itself. It's got no place to go, but it's something once you've added it to a word. Election is also a derivational element, but now we've borrowed it from Latin. We got a lot of that in English. And I believe about 90 to 95% of the words that our high schoolers will see in their textbooks are Latin. So that rise begins at around grade 4. So we have to be prepared for that. Morphology matters. I just showed you the toddlers do it, and 5-year-olds do it. And guess what? Kindergartners, grades 1, 2, and 3, and 4 do it, right? Because we used to think that, oh, morphology is about middle school. It's about complex word reading and text comprehension. Well, no, because the kids learn it really early. They come to school with morphological awareness, just like they come to school with phonological awareness. And you see that phonological awareness, it's in blue, is 20% of the variance, right? There's lots of things that explain kids' development. A quarter of that is phonological awareness. Well, 5%, a chunk of that, is actually morphological awareness. By the time you get to grade 4, this stuff flips, and then a quarter is actually explained by morphological awareness. It just grows inside and pushes everything else out. Because 4th graders, 5th graders, they should be reading phonologically, right, in chunks. Morphological awareness interventions do miracles, especially for children with low vocabularies, children with low reading proficiency and low reading comprehension. So what you see here is that there's a morphological awareness intervention that was done. I believe these kids were about 4th grade, and was done to 2 groups, typical readers and less able readers, what they called them. And what they discovered is that, well, kids improve in morphological awareness. Amazingly, less able readers actually improve even more. And then it, of course, improves word reading, but remarkably, it improves reading comprehension. And it doesn't, notice how it actually doesn't improve reading comprehension in typical readers as much as it does in less able readers. That's because less able readers tend to read less, and they tend to know less words. And now you've given them a key to the lock of reading words like sidewalk. Okay, I know the word side, but now how to put them together, and I've got a sidewalk, right? Or elect, I've given them elect and election. I've given them keys. You've literally given the kids the keys to breaking into the code that unlocks words for them, and thereby unlocks not just word reading by itself, but reading comprehension. So this is why we think it's really important, and that's how we look at it. Morphemes and morphological awareness, it's about making and recognizing new words. It contributes to reading at an earlier age than we tend to think, and contributes to word reading, reading comprehension. And there's evidence to suggest that morphological intervention is really essential if you're dealing with at-risk learners and kids with dyslexia. And we can discuss that after the presentation, if you like. So we'll start by hearing them. What's the business about hearing big words? In dyslexia, as you know, phonological awareness is impaired. The kids have difficulty breaking words into sounds and then mapping them into letters. Kids with dyslexia don't usually have problems learning words, though, right? So that's what we call meaning, vocabulary. That's not the problem. Morphology is kind of in between sidewalk and foggy. That's kind of vocabulary. but then it kind of isn't, right? These are morphophonemes. So people have been on the fence for a long time. Where is that? Is that part of the impairment, or is that actually part of the compensation? What are we doing with this? So we've known for a while that if you bring a bunch of kids into a research lab and you give them a rhyme judgment task and you use neuroimaging on them, you're going to get activation along these left hemisphere brain regions. Your language is on the left, folks. In case you wonder what it was, it's not in your left toe. It's in the brain and it's on the left. And there's a part of the brain that's right behind your eyebrow and does also complex syntax. All the stuff in the dusty textbooks. And then back here where your ear is where you get just word recognition, sound processing. And kids with dyslexia tend to not activate these regions as much. We think the dysfunctions in dyslexia are linked to the dysfunctions of these regions. And we've shown that quite a bit in our research. That's what's on those fancy brain pictures. So we know that phonological awareness is impaired in dyslexia. We know that in dyslexia, the language brain regions are less active if you give them the phonological awareness task. And we really have no idea what's going on with phonology. And this is an issue that was going in circles because it's also a question for remediation. Well, how do you deal with that? And as we keep talking about this, and I keep mentioning, right, when we think about reading, that means connecting word sounds towards meanings to print. I know how to say cat. I know it says, cat's the first thing that says meow, and I know it spells CAT. Now, morphology kind of feels in between, right? Because I take magic, magician, I've changed sounds, but the orthography is the same. It's got sound and it's got meaning. So it's got lots of things going on. It kind of seems to put these things together. So we're looking at it, and we're looking at it from a neurological perspective. And then we talked about the parts of the brain. So we think that parts of the brain that process sound, and that's the STG on the slide if you're looking at it, may actually also be impaired in their processing of morphology because it's still more for phonology. That's the element that's phonology. But MTG, these are the parts of the brain that do meaning, might be okay. Who knows? Because they are okay learning words. Maybe that will be intact. And then we wonder about the frontal lobe. We really wonder about the frontal lobe because that's about computing complex language. So that's what we do. We bring the kids in. We ask them if we have time at the end. I'll show you a video of how this works. And we ask them to put a cap on their heads and do a morphological awareness task with us. The cap measures light, right? So it measures as light goes in and out of your head like a pulse oximeter if you've ever been to the hospital. So it tells that blood oxygenation. A blood oxygenation is a correlate of the neural activity. It's a fun gizmo. And we bring the kids in, we put the cap on, and we say, bedroom, classroom, mushroom. Which ones go together and which ones do not? We just did that together. And then we have a roots task. That's a root, right? So these are compound roots, classroom, bedroom. And then we give them a derivation task. Dancer, ER doesn't stand by itself, right? That's why it's called derivation. Dancer, singer, finger. Which one doesn't belong? Well, finger doesn't belong because there's no finger, right? It's one word. So that's a distractor. And the kids do really well at this. They're like, oh yeah, easy, click, click. This is all done. And then the way this is done is they actually hear it. They don't see anything. So they hear a word, seafood, and then they hear seashell, and then they hear seating, and then they press a button. And that's how we do it. That's the easiest way of doing this. And what we had is we had 25 kids with dyslexia who are about age 9. And we matched them to 25 children who were younger. They're about 7 years of age. That's because those younger typical readers are of the same reading ability. As you probably know, kids with dyslexia tend to be about 2 years behind their average peers. And so we match them on reading ability to see, is there a difference, right? So I have a kid with dyslexia who is 9. I have a kid with typical reading who is 7, but they read the same, right? They're at the same reading level. And what I'm asking now, does their brain look the same or different? That is the question. So here I'm showing you that the kids are doing the same. Kids with dyslexia actually are doing a little bit better on the morphological awareness. Pretty cool. Again, they're older, and some of them have had therapy, and so but they're on average 2 years behind. And now we'll look at the brain. Remember, we're looking at parts of the brain corresponding to sound, meaning, and grammar, and we're wondering which one's going to light up. Let's take a look. So when you look at the derivations for kids who are typical readers, we get activation of parts of the brain that are the frontal lobe and the middle temporal lobe. So that's like the complex language, grammar, and the meaning. Great. Now we'll look at kids with dyslexia. This is not a visual processing error here. We just don't see activation there that would be of average in the kids with dyslexia. So when we look at derivations, that's the singer, dancer, finger. This looks like phonology, folks, right? So if I give these kids a rhyme judgment task, I'm going to be seeing the exact same thing. There's underactivation in the language hemisphere of the brain, which tells us that derivations are part of the disorder. Now we're going to look at the roots. Roots are sidewalks and classrooms and bedrooms, mushrooms, all that stuff. And now look at that. There's a happy brain. I'm seeing activation, all the regions I was expecting to see them in. Here's the MTG and the STG and the frontal lobe. So that's the parts of the brain that recognize words, that process sounds, and they do complex grammar. It's on. It's on. And so what it tells me is that there's strength and there's deficits, hence dyslexia, but there's also strength and resilience. And strength and resilience is in the meaning. As we talked earlier, if those of you who are therapists and have worked with kids with dyslexia, you will know that the kids' vocabulary, as a result of therapy, the vocabulary tends to grow really fast. Phonological awareness does not do the same magic, but the vocabulary grows really fast. They're learning words, right? And so they're learning to recognize words. And this is what you're seeing. Their semantic, their ability to do meanings and word learning is intact, and they're leveraging it. And if we go back, right, their ability to do segmentation, that's still struggling. That's part of the disorder. So morphology is not one. There's different kinds. And so you have to train them. Just like you train kids with dyslexia on phonological awareness, you have to train them on derivational morphology. Remember foggy, E doesn't live by itself. It's a morphophonemic unit. They're having difficulty with it. So question 1, what's about morphological awareness and dyslexia? Is it impaired or is it compensatory? Well, morphology is not monolith. There's strengths to leverage in vocabulary learning, and hence the root morphology, root compounds, and targets, a clear target for intervention that needs intervention is a derivational morphology. So now we'll talk about reading. What brain regions, how does the brain respond to complex words? As we talk, you guys are going to come out here all proficient neurologists. So right next to your ear is actually the auditory cortex. So when you hear stuff, the parts of the brain that process hearing is right next to your ear. And then the back of your brain, the very back of your brain, is the occipital lobe, which is the one that does the seeing. I know it's funny because the eyes are at the front of the brain and the parts of the brain that see are in the back. That's because there's giant neuronal highways that take you right to the back. And if you remember any of that frog anatomy in grade 5, they're crossing, right? So right goes to the left and left goes to the right. But that's irrelevant for today. You're seeing with the back of the brain, you're hearing with the middle of the brain where the ears are. And so we're asking, well, what's about reading and hearing complex words? Is that just these modality differences, or is there something else? So we're back to our classroom bedroom mushroom, and sometimes they're just hearing the 3 words as we talked before, and sometimes they're reading them. Dancer, singer, finger, so they're reading them. I also have a control condition that I forgot to mention earlier, where they just either see 3 words or hear 3 words, 2 of which are completely identical. That's a really dumb task. Anybody can do it. The youngest kids can do it. It's a control condition meant to elicit those basic modality differences. So what we have is when the kids are just listening to the words, the temporal lobe is on, magic. And when they're just reading the words that are, the easy task, it's the back of the brain. It's, again, magic. That's what we expect to see. That's basic anatomy. Now, the question is what happens when you do derivational conditions? When you listen to complex polymorphic words that have derivations, you actually don't get a difference in the temporal lobe. Listening to easy words and listening to difficult words about the same. It's the frontal lobe where we see the differences. There's more computations going on. But the back there, they heard them. They moved on. If you look at the reading, this is fun. You get the frontal lobe, that's expected. You get the occipital lobe, that's expected. But you get the auditory cortex. You get the part of the brain that's hearing, which means when your third grader is reading complex polymorphic derived words, they turn on the parts of the brain that do hearing. So they're hearing with their eyes. Reading simple words doesn't do this. It's reading complex words that does it, hence the difference. In the auditory modality, you don't get that difference because it's the same. But in the visual modality, when you're seeing complex words, you actually turn on your auditory mechanisms, your phonological mechanisms, which is why we say reading is what is it, right? Morphophonological. This is evidence to that because these are hard words. This would not necessarily be the same in adult fluent readers, but the third graders are surely at this level. So, children brain hears words, and that's typical kids. This is your typical third graders. They are hearing the polymorphic complex words if they're going to do this successfully. The kids with dyslexia, as we saw earlier, are not going to do that. You gotta train them. That's part of the disorder. And we find associations. Better readers, the better you read. So you've got a bunch of third graders. The ones who read better actually activate the auditory cortex more so than the poor readers. So you really have to teach them that morphophonological element. It doesn't come out of thin air. It relies on structured literacy, especially for at-risk readers. Which brings me to the next topic, and hopefully I left Rebecca enough time to tell you the most important part why you truly are here today is how to teach this stuff. Hi, Rebecca. I'll advance the slides. You just give me cues.
Okay, great. All right. Wonderful. So question 3 is how do we teach morphology? So we're gonna get down to the basics here. Go ahead and advance. And I included this pictorial timeline because of the English language, because we want to see all of the different components to the English language and why they're complex and where they came from. We can explain the language through etymology, right? Word origin. The reason that word is spelled the way it is because it's French or it comes from the Anglo-Saxon. So we're going to go into etymology and relate that to morphology. Go ahead and advance. So a scope and sequence for morphology. There is not one approved, recognized, researched scope and sequence for morphology. But what we're going to use is the etymology. Anglo-Saxon words, then Latin words, then Greek words. And we're going to kind of mix those in and we're going to show you a scope and sequence. Any structured literacy program is going to teach morphology, roots, prefixes, and suffixes in a scope and sequence that makes sense from easy, simple to complex. So for Anglo-Saxon, usually I always say those are mostly your, K to 2. And when those beginning readers read right in the scope and sequence, what you're going to teach is base words before roots. So Anglo-Saxon has base words with single morphemes. They're simple patterns of the language. And so we teach those closed syllable, open syllable, vowel consonant-es first. And so that's how the Anglo-Saxon language worked. So we see those compound words that Yulia was talking about, doghouse and ball game, and then high frequency prefixes. So these are going to be taught so that we can see and understand meaningful units added to those base words. And also we have inflectional and some common derivational suffixes, not as many in Anglo-Saxon, but a few. And the difference being whether it changes the part of speech or not. And those are going to really kick in later in the upper elementary, middle grades, and high school. So this is your Anglo-Saxon layer. Most of this is taught early on, and then we're going to transition to the Latin layer. So in the Latin layer, we add, basically the difference is roots. And I always say after, anywhere third, maybe mid-second, when they start getting pictures going away from books and chapters, books, more dense text. And when they start having to syllabicate, syllable divide, is where we start seeing, okay, we have a root, not a base word. So that meaningful unit has to have something added to it, right? So the prefix is added or a suffix is added. So these are a few Latin prefixes that we teach. And then we also teach the meaningful unit. So as soon as I teach a root, viz, I can teach lots of words, vision, visible, and I can add different endings and different beginnings. And now I have, I teach, but if I can recognize the meaningful unit, that makes multisyllabic word reading easier because I'm attaching meaning always. That's what morphology, the beautiful thing about morphology is it adds the meaningful unit. So really what I say is, we have to be careful we're not creating word callers, right? They know how to pronounce the word, they're fluent, but they don't understand what they're reading. So morphology is a huge boost for that meaning layer. And then we have in Latin layer, we call assimilated prefixes. We used to, back in the day, we called them chameleon prefixes because that final consonant of the prefix morphs into the first consonant of the root. And that makes suppose, and that's why you have the double P, double L. We used to call them chameleon because it kind of assimilates to that. But this is Latin. That's where Latin. So that's kind of how I know whether I have a double consonant and why that is, and that meaningful unit to that prefix. And then we really see derivational suffixes kick in. I'm going to give you some information on where the best bang for your buck instruction will be in some of these suffixes. Which one should I teach, why, and how often? So the last layer is Greek. And the Greek layer, we have graphemes that are unique to Greek-based words. So I know it's Greek, and I know I'm not going to use for the sound an F, but PH because of that. So when that happens, I know that it's based on the etymology. That origin of the word, like phone, would come with that PH versus the F. The same way for words like chorus, CH making a K sound. Silent letter spellings are often Greek. So I'm going to use that information. I'm going to teach it. I always explained it. This is why it happens. This is because this is where these words came from, the origin, the etymology of the word. And then we have those combining forms. And Greek has combining forms versus roots and base words. And that means I'm just going to put two together. Microscope, microscope. So they're two combining forms. So that gives the Greek layer of the language. And the next thing we have is, on the next slide, is a sample scope and sequence, and I have the link here. I don't know if you visited the Literacy Through Language website, but what I like about this now, once again, there's not one recognized, like this is the sequence, the most approved research evidence aligned sequence. It is about teaching those layers. I can't emphasize that enough this evening, because if I'm teaching the Anglo-Saxon and progressively moving to complex Latin layer, now they can read multisyllabic words and understand meaningful units. I can also move into the Greek and disciplinary literacy, where the language is more scientific, it's more technical. Those are your Greek words. So if I look at these lists, these are just recommended scope and sequence grades 4 to 8 that I want to make sure I hit these. Why? Because that's going to keep their vocabulary and their reading on grade level. I want to make sure I hit these. So I like that they offer these as in grade progressions. I think that's helpful. So in the next slide, that's just an example. So check that out. I always say, you know what, especially I specialized later in my career in older struggling readers, middle school and high school. Time is of the essence. I had kids reading 3, 4, 5 grade levels below their grade level and their current grade level. And we have no time to waste, right? So Denise Ide, in her book, Uncovering the Logic of English, if you've not read that, it's a great resource. But I pulled something out of there I think is really helpful. 9 prefixes make up 75% of words with prefixes. So talk about a huge bang for your buck in teaching. 75% of words with prefixes will use these prefixes. So I think that if I'm going to teach, I'm going to teach the ones where I get the most bang for my buck. 10 suffixes make up 85% of words that contained a suffix. So these 10 suffixes, I always taught these first, especially for older students, because if they see them, they know what they mean. They know the derivations of them, and I'm moving their understanding forward, how to break the word, how to understand the word, and how to gain meaning from that word part. So that I thought was useful for us this evening. And the next slide. Okay, so goals of instruction, Louisa Mode's Speech to Print, 3rd edition. Let's talk about these goals, and then I'm going to give you a routine that we can talk about that really makes it systematic, which I'm all about structured literacy, because kids that struggle, even kids that don't struggle, it's relying on what can they count on? They can count on this basic routine, and then you can feed them that information in nice, direct, explicit instruction, short spurts, good practice, and it's everything they need all in one. So first of all, the goals of instruction is students should be pronouncing the words. So I guess I'm asking you, when you are teaching, do you have the students pronounce the words orally? Expressive, receptive, and expressive language. If the teacher's feeding it in and the students are never giving it back, they're not using expressive language. So first of all, we want them to pronounce the words. We want them to attend. So I like to think of these like word profiles, right? What is the sounds? What is the spelling? What is the meaning? And what is the origin? What is the etymology? Where did that word come from? So I'm going to attend to different usages and layers of language for each word. I'm going to learn, students will learn words in lists and in the context of connected language. I even want to extend that, not just in the context of connected, like discourse, connected. So maybe I'm going to take a suffix that I'm teaching and its meaning and just read them, have lists of words, and maybe mark those up. I could circle or box my suffix and what is the meaning of the base word and how does S make it more than one or plural? And I can talk about that. But when I add it to passages and I pull them out and highlight, what are words you see in that paragraph that have suffixes, and I highlight them and I talk about them, and how does that connected text to language and meaning? And I'm really dissecting the language for meaning, but also within the context of the content. So if I'm teaching about, the solar system, or if I'm teaching, science or math or social studies, whatever I'm teaching, you need all of our teachers within the disciplines are teaching language. And they need to take these word parts and vocabulary, and they need to embed this instruction in what they're teaching. Practice, and I say perfect practice, right? Makes permanent, meaning I am strategically planning for practice, and I'm going to vary that practice. I'm going to build words, and then I'm going to dissect those words. I'm going to build words from their parts, and then I'm going to take those and I'm going to break them apart, right? So I'm going to put words together and I'm going to take words apart, and I'm thinking about that decoding piece and that encoding piece, right? And lastly, I'm going to apply. Words will be taught in relation to other words with the same morphemes that include derived forms. So when I'm teaching photo, I'm also teaching photograph and photographer, and I'm seeing all of the different variations, just like I used that viz example. So here's our goals. Really, really important. Make sure you're having students pronounce words. Make sure they're attending to all the layers of language. Make sure they're learning within the separate, like wordless and context. Make sure they're practicing. How much practice? So maybe I taught it, but they just didn't have time to practice to mastery. Also, I'm applying it. I'm applying it to other words, not just isolation, but all words with a root, that suffix, that prefix. So the next slide. So here is a daily routine. And the daily routine, and I'm going to, in the next section, I'm just going to talk about a daily routine would introduce a morpheme. You're going to study examples without example words. You're going to share non-examples. You're going to build and define words, and then you're going to contextualize it. So this would be a routine, and this is what it looks like. Now, if you've not read Shifting the Balance, this routine is presented in there, and it's all a lesson plan. They also have a website that you can download this for free. And this lesson plan gives you examples of identifying and practicing morpheme. What's the purpose of that? Introduce direct, explicit instruction. Tell them what it is. Teach it. This is a suffix S. And this is what it means. It means plural. And that I'm going to make words more than one. And then I'm going to study examples of words that have that morpheme. And then if relevant, there might be a few words where some of the letters appear in sequence but do not function as a particular morpheme. You might think of the word his. The word his ends in an S, but it's not a suffix. It's not a plural. So I want to make sure if there's any words I can think of that I can present to say, okay, in this word, it's not functioning that way. And then I'm building words and their definitions. What's my base? What's the meaning? And making words with that. Now, when I contextualize, I might use a few closed sentences. I might use that within the context and say, have students provide a missing word. And for a sentence using a word from the list of examples, okay? So this is an example of a routine. To me, if you could spend 15 minutes a day introducing morphemes, and I shared with you a scope and sequence, any structured literacy curriculum I taught over the years always embedded them within my scope and sequence. I never had a scope and sequence that didn't teach morphemes. And those morphemes started in kindergarten. So this is not an upper grade thing. This is kids need to learn language and its derivations and its parts from the onset. So next slide, please. Okay, so here's our teaching principles. First of all, we mentioned explicit teaching. So what we're going to do as a principal is always explicitly teach students the meaning of the prefixes, roots, suffixes using meaningful context. We can teach it in isolation, but we have to transfer it to context. We're doing a disservice if we don't do that. Embed morphological awareness instruction in all content areas. I mentioned content. In the content, what are you teaching, and making sure you're pulling out words, pulling out meaningful units, pulling out roots and suffixes, and helping to dissect language within the content areas. Elicit morphologically complex words from reading passages. So if you are reading a passage, make sure those multisyllabic words, you're dissecting it for morphemes as well as not just syllabicating it for decoding. You need that both sides of language in there. The decoding's important, the fluency is important, but we've got to have that language component. And then create anchor charts for morphological awareness. So we can have anchor charts on how we can, prioritize language and what are the words that you're direct explicitly teaching that are related to your content. So make sure you have those visual cues and anchor charts up. So next slide. So a concept introduction. So this is an example, NIHAS Education Center. I was a former vice president of literacy initiatives at NIHAS Education Center. One of my favorite programs is language enrichment. And in language enrichment, I wanted to give you this example because I think it's a great quick and dirty routine where we teach a concept. The teacher is going to say these words. The teacher is going to ask the students to say these words after me. Helpful, thankful, restful. So this is the auditory. Teacher says, students repeat. What do you hear in the final position of these words? And this is an auditory discovery, right? Auditory. They may or may not discover what is it, and I might have to repeat. The students say full. You're right. The teacher's going to write those words on the board and say, what do you see that's the same? So now you're doing a visual discovery. I see the letters in all those words, FUL, and the students will respond. In the final position, so what does that mean? The teacher is going to directly explain the letters FUL at the end of these words are called a suffix. A suffix is a letter, a group of letters added to the end of the base word. Suffix FUL is pronounced full, and it begins with a consonant, so it's a consonant suffix. It means full of. So if I say helpful, I'm full of help. Thankful, I'm full of thank. Restful, I'm full of rest. Next slide. So when we talk about explicitly teaching, I'm going to run through roots, morphemes, or prefixes, suffixes. And I'm going to run through that routine. And then I'm going to finish that with a concept introduction where I say, I make a concept card. So I have a deck of suffix cards. Now my suffix cards are yellow, so they can differentiate maybe graphemes or, where I would have a reading deck. This is where these are meaningful units. This is a little different. So I'm going to have yellow suffixes. Consonant suffix FUL. Consonant suffix means something for spelling because I don't change my base word when I add a consonant suffix. So I want them to know for other purposes what to do with that consonant suffix. Helpful, full means full of help. Next slide. So then I'm going to review that. Now to finish, close us up, because I wanted to leave a little bit of time for questions. So a few activities Bowers and Kirby recommend and I think these are really, really good activities to bring home the idea of etymology, word origin, as well as morphology, is word matrix. We could make all different kinds of words, and this is a great activities for you to design, resign, right? Signal, signed, I could add all kind of on a signer. And so signify, so we've got connectors in there. Oh my goodness. So much rich word building here in this activity. Next slide. Bowers and Kirby also recommend word webs, and I used derivational webs all the time on, give me words with viz to see. And here we're going to build words and we're going to learn from each other, and same for, the prefix com. So you can do it prefixes, suffixes. Next slide. Those graphic organizers. And to be honest with you, this is when I did my advanced Orton Gillingham training back in the day. I had to learn all the different roots and where they came from and what their meaning was. So I know I used flashcards. William Van Cleve always sold a lot of really good resources in this area, and I remember using his flashcard deck. So I think this is a great. It gives information. It tells you where it came from, word origin, and then has a lot of examples. Next slide. So I've added some resources at the end here. I know we can make PDFs, so these can be live, Yulia, but I'm going to open it up for any comments or questions.
Rebecca and I can take a couple questions. You can just speak up or you can post them in the chat. I will make the slides right now, so I will download them and make a PDF.
Mary chatted, can you please give a definition of connectors?
So, do you want to answer that, Yulia, or want me to answer that?
Oh, please go ahead.
Okay, so in the Latin language, you've got connectors. So that I is connecting your root to your suffix. And so that's why a lot of times you'll see, I mean, I think of the I in words. And so it's Latin. That's why even when I taught TION as shun, like vacation, the TI was the connector between vacay and the ON at the end. And it's really, that's its function. It's a functional, it's connecting to parts of the word.
Can I ask a deeper question?
Sure, please.
Okay, so tomorrow I'm going to be teaching what I thought was TION,
Mhm.
but I did a little research and figured out, okay, it's probably ION. But now
Mhm.
am I hearing from you that it's really ON? I mean,
So
what is
I
happening here?
taught it TION. I always taught TION, shun, vacation. I taught it as actually it was taught as a final stable syllable because that's what it is. It's always in the final position of words. It's stable. It never changes. The spelling doesn't change. The pronunciation doesn't change. And it's the final syllable in that word. So that's why we taught it as a final stable syllable, and a lot of structured literacy programs do that. It just depends. I think it depends on your students. To me, I needed them to be able to decode it. I needed them to understand the meaning of what that ending does to the word, right? Does it change? What part of speech is it? It's signifying a part of speech. So some students, in order to understand, need to drill down. My students got the TION perfectly fine. This is what it does in the word. This is what it's doing. This is its function at the end. And so, I mean, it's up to you. There's different ways to do it. I taught it together. I don't know if anybody else wants to add. Oh, yeah. Let me see if I can go in and hope that answers your question. That's how I taught it. I taught it together, but it's really nice to know those informations. And I think you could dig into that, because when I learned that, I'm like, I'm constantly learning new things about the language. I just never totally master it, right? But when I learned that, I was like, well, yes, you could teach it in a various ways as long as your students are getting the meaning, the spelling, and they can read the words. I mean, you've accomplished your goal, but some of those kids are so inquisitive. They want to know the why, the how, where did this come from? And that's where I'd like to know. The more I knew about, I could explain it. Oh, you know what? That's spelled that way because it's a French word, right? And this comes from that language. So I loved, my older students loved, they felt so smart. I was like, oh, okay. And they would pass that information on. I'll let you, if there's any other, let me see if I can grab that link real quick. That I can put that in that website. I want to see if without losing you, I can go put that in the chat. Real quick. I know we're coming into, yeah, right here. And this is it, I just went straight to the morphology, but you can browse around in there. There's a ton. I really think there's so much in there, and you can download the lesson plan, and I think it's dynamic, to be honest with you. I wish I would have had it back in the day when I was teaching more. Now I'm teaching teachers. Here we go. Hopefully that's helpful. And I am going to put my, you're welcome, T53@uakron.edu. I'm gonna share my email if somebody thinks of anything or questions, or wants to reach out for any way, any reason. There's my email. Yulia can do the same. Just thank you, Yulia. I love presenting with you. I'm gonna tell you, I could listen to you present your research all day. It's so interesting.
I have just, Rebecca, I emailed the organizer, Rebecca. I've just emailed you so you can put it in the chat. The slides, sorry, I got distracted because I downloaded the slides and I formatted them so they're in a small, nice file that's easy to spread out. They just look like a handout. So
Julia, I just made you a co-host if you got that link and you want to pop it in the chat.
oh,
Now you can do it. Or I can just send
to
emails to
everyone.
everyone.
Oh, okay. Let me pull this up. Yes.
Just so that I don't know what happened with my recording if I minimize right now.
See.
You should be able to.
No, it tells me only the admin can do it, so I cannot do it. I emailed it to
Okay.
you, so it's
Great. I'll
a
send
file,
it
it's a
to,
PDF. Yeah, you
yep,
just
I'll send it to
put it
everyone.
into the chat. Yeah. Sorry,
Yeah.
everybody. So, Rebecca, well, we hope everything goes well for your upcoming grandbaby boy. That's important. That's an important milestone.
Thank you.
Very, very excited.
I can't wait. Oh.
Some of us are jealous as we're just
Yeah.
still battling the teenage years of, of the stuff we've got in our house.
It's worth the
Uh,
battle.
It
The
is.
rewards are great. The grandparent side is fabulous. It is
Amazing.
amazing. Yeah. So with
Rebecca's terrific as ever because I can just tell you all sorts of fun stuff about the brain. What you do with that in the classroom, I don't always know, to be perfectly honest, which is why I have to talk to folks like Rebecca who are like, well, Julia, you gotta sound that stuff out. So yeah, you got auditory cortex. Hello, brain science. But in case you doubted, you needed to sound it out now. You actually do need your auditory cortex. If it ain't there, you gotta teach them. You gotta pronounce that stuff. It's
That's
not enough
right.
to just throw a book at them, right? That's sort of the point I think both Rebecca and I trying to make. You can't just throw the book at them and hope to God they will just somehow through osmosis figure it out. You gotta help them hear these units, and then you help them connect them to visual systems. You gotta help the kids make the connections. It doesn't happen by itself.
I think that's so important and being in the field and working with coaches and working with teachers. This idea that it's not always print first. Start with that biologically primary piece, the language. Start with the speech, those units that they are familiar with, and try to connect it in that direction. We do a lot of putting the print in front of them and having them analyze it that way rather than it just thinking about that routine that Rebecca shared, right? Say the word, listen to the word, analyze it auditorily first. And it seems like such a small tweak, but it is so impactful in every direction.
Yeah, because otherwise speaking of teenagers, I've got a 12-year-old. He's a wonderful decoder. He'll decode anything you want. Ask him what that meant. It's one job to ask them to read, no problem. Then go ahead and ask him what he understood. Then you're all in trouble. It's like, I don't know, I just read it with intonation and all. You would have never guessed it. No freaking clue. So yeah,
Yeah.
day in, day out, my friends.
Yes. Well, thank you. Thank you for your time. What a
Thank you
gift.
for having us, and thank you to everybody who joined us, especially all the teachers in the classrooms. Thank you so much for doing the hard work. As a parent, I just take my hat off to everybody who can keep on day in, day out with this crowd. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you for having us, Rebecca.
Yeah, and what a gift. I would love to let's learn more about what you're doing in Ohio because The schools do need teachers. I love listening to what's happening in higher ed, and as the needle is moving and services are being restructured for what our teachers are getting in the field. The work that you're doing is so important. So thank you. And I hope that you're making lots of networks and friends and sharing syllabi and course loads and what this looks like and that it can happen and what that field experience might look like. All these things are so very important. I think about even all that work, then we send our pre-service teachers out into the field. Do they have a supervising teacher that is qualified? I mean, there's so much work that our universities need to do, and I think that they've gotten a lot of rough press, but it's a big cog to move. And so the work that you're doing is so incredibly important. So thank you for what you are bringing to the field.
They do an amazing work. I visited them in
Mhm.
person in Ohio. They are a couple of years ahead of Michigan because their legislation got passed a couple of years ago.
Yes.
So we've got a lot to learn from them because they have been out and trailblazing, and not all has gone smoothly for them, as Rebecca can share. So it'd be nice not to repeat their mistake, learn on
Yeah.
other people's
Yes.
mistakes.
Oh,
We'll
for
repeat that. We'll
sure.
make our own clever mistakes, I'm sure, but
Yeah.
Yes, I
And
love that.
thank you so much for the work that you're both doing, and thank you for your time and your gracious gift to us with your time and with your
well, thank you for
to share.
organizing.
Yeah. All right. With
Yes,
that,
thank you.
fabulous
Bye.
evening, everyone. Good night.
Good night.